John Carmack, one of the founders of id Software, famously stated around the time of Doom's release that according to him, story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. Though that quote has aged very poorly, he may have had a point. There are tons of excellent video game experiences which feature either half-baked or totally neglected narratives, but incompetent storytelling really becomes a problem when the plot was bad to begin with. Though they certainly redeem themselves in other ways, many great games have straight-up awful plots. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 great video games with terrible storylines. Number 10. Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, 2017. Despite a few shortcomings, Bethesda's revival of id's famous Wolfenstein franchise has been relatively well received. Though the first game was, ironically, pretty narrative heavy for a game bearing the Wolfenstein name, it was nonetheless one of the most well-remembered games of 2014. Its sequel, however, didn't quite get that same treatment. The series' alt-history storyline drastically jumped the shark. Plus, for what it's worth, the overall Steam reviews for Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus are mixed. While the original series reboot was a satisfying tale of perseverance and revenge, the new game's plot is all over the place. After surviving a decapitation at the hands of the nefarious Frau Engel, a ludicrous plot in and of itself, franchise protagonist William Blazkowicz embarks on a long-winded tour of American cities which eventually culminates in a trip to the planet Venus. Yes, seriously, Venus, that Venus. 2014's Wolfenstein game did see players touring a secret Nazi moon base, but that felt entirely practical when compared to some of the shenanigans which occur in the sequel. This is by no means an indictment of Bethesda or Machine Games, but if this is to become a trilogy, it'd be nice to tone things down just a notch. Number 9. CRYSIS, 2007. CRYSIS, a sci-fi military FPS released in 2007 and set in the far-off year of 2020, was famous for its insanely demanding specs on PC back in the day. While Crytek's breakout title could run on just about anything today, the phrase, "but can it run CRYSIS?" is still a huge meme in certain circles. While everyone remembers this game for its stunning visuals and inventive gameplay mechanics, few claim to ever have understood or cared all that much about the story. CRYSIS's narrative elements were by far its weakest feature, and the game felt more like a glitzy tech demo than anything else. The story revolves around the North Korean invasion of an island not far from the Philippines, on which a US research team seems to have made some impactful discoveries. A part of a covert team sent in to extract these scientists, things quickly spiral out of control as, well, alien stuff happens. The introduction of the Ceph, an alien race bent on the destruction of humanity, is pretty jarring in the original CRYSIS. The game goes from a fairly standard stealth action experience to War of the Worlds wannabe at the drop of a hat, and it's weird. Number 8. Call of Duty Ghosts, 2013. The original Call of Duty titles focused on exploring just about every conceivable narrative angle of the Second World War. Yet when the series made the transition to modern warfare in the 2007 release of the same name, it was still more or less grounded in the geopolitical realities of the time. The same can absolutely not be said about 2013's Call of Duty Ghosts. Releasing during a time in which popular opinion was turning against the repetitive, over-the-top nature of the COD campaigns, Ghosts explored an absolutely ill-conceived and ridiculous plot thread. In the bleak, distant future of 2017, all South American countries band together to form the Federation of the United Americas. They then capture a US orbital bombardment satellite and use it to destroy San Diego. Most of the campaign takes place 10 years later and chronicles the end of a decade-long conflict which culminates in the destruction of the Federation, along with, presumably, most of South America. The COD campaigns are known for being big, loud, and dumb, and it doesn't get much bigger, louder, or dumber than this. Number 7. Far Cry 5, 2018. In the fifth entry in the long-running Far Cry series, the end is nigh as cult leader and apparent doomsday prepper Joseph Seed lays claim to the fictional Hope County, Montana. Pragmatic villains and unbelievable plots are staples of the Far Cry series, but this takes things a step further. Joseph Seed seems convinced that the end of the world will soon be upon his congregation, yet it's difficult for the player to get a beat on anything occurring outside of Hope County. As the game comes to a close, the player is given a choice to either walk away from or resist the Eden's Gate cult. Should he or she walk away, they seem to escape with the intent of returning with reinforcements, until Seed appears to hypnotize them, lapsing the character into servitude to the cult. On the other hand, should the player choose to resist, they're essentially forced to fight their squad mates until an out-of-left-field nuclear detonation brings the game to an end. It's definitely not the most subtle way to round out the plot, and many Far Cry fans have since voiced their frustrations over this lackluster ending. New Dawn was a whole thing though. Number 6. The Evil Within, 2014. Helmed by Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami, The Evil Within was a 2014 survival horror title that felt a bit too much like a retread of Resi 4 in the minds of some players. Yet while Resi 4 was campy and hilarious in places, The Evil Within was stone cold serious, and it suffered as a result. The plot made little to no sense, and even when all the cards were laid on the table near the end of the game, the overarching narrative still came across as little more than a reason to chain a bunch of spooky environments together. Cerebral and involved, The Evil Within and its sequel may have benefited from a more straightforward plot. Instead, players were treated to the story of an umbrella-like organization intent on developing a biochemical hyper-reality, which they could use to rule the world before the man they placed in charge of it betrays them and corrupts everything. The concept is already hard to grasp, and it's made even more difficult by the fact that almost nothing is ever told directly to the player. Most who saw this game through to the end were probably still left scratching their heads as the credits rolled. Number 5. Uncharted Drake's Fortune, 2007. Developed by notorious Sony cohorts Naughty Dog and released in 2007, Uncharted was a system-selling visual masterpiece meant to contend with Microsoft's rival Halo franchise. Though the PlayStation 3 would go on to lose that generation's console war by most accounts, the Uncharted franchise stood as something Sony fans could rub in the faces of their Xbox-owning counterparts. While the first Uncharted title is by and large a great game, the plot leaves something to be desired. It feels like what might have happened if Steven Spielberg had to film the original Indiana Jones trilogy on a shoestring budget, complete with hokey plot points and ridiculous cursed idol MacGuffins. Things really take a turn for the worse in the third act, when Nathan Drake is handed an MP40 and tasked with gunning down mutated Nazi zombies. Nobody seems to remember how off the rails the first Uncharted game's plot was, and that's probably for the best. Subsequent entries in Naughty Dog's famous action platforming series would fare much better from a narrative perspective, and we're all better off turning a blind eye to that weird pseudo-survival horror segment. Number 4. Fallout 4, 2015. In 2011, Obsidian Entertainment, now a subsidiary of Microsoft, proved that Bethesda wasn't the only studio out there capable of making a satisfying FPS Fallout title. With the ball in their court, what did Bethesda do to prove that they still had a handle on the franchise? By gutting most of the series' RPG mechanics and simplifying the story, of course. Fallout 4 is far from a bad game, but it doesn't quite live up to the legacy of the franchise as a whole, particularly from a narrative standpoint. While Fallout New Vegas had tons of possible endgame scenarios and was so story-rich that it could have given George R.R. Martin a run for his money, Fallout 4 was very by the numbers and featured a mere 4 endings, each focusing on one of the title's 4 main factions. What's more, there weren't quite as many interesting side quests or unique story beats to be found. Sure, players could help the super mutant Strong find the milk of human kindness, or help Preston Garvey defend yet another settlement, but it all felt slightly soulless when compared to older entries. Number 3. Doom, 1993. As previously mentioned, 1993's seminal first-person shooter Doom was severely anemic in terms of narrative. At that time, video games weren't really considered to be an appropriate medium for storytelling, thanks to their relatively rudimentary natures. And that stigma would prevail until titles like Final Fantasy VII and the original Fallout would begin to sway opinions half a decade later. Yet fully fledged or not, Doom's plot is pretty stupid. Something about demons from hell invading a Martian base? Maybe throw in an evil megacorporation for good effect? The game's mission briefings may as well just say shoot stuff. It would convey just about as much meaning. As a matter of fact, Doom doesn't even care about its plot. In 2016's Bethesda-backed series reboot, the player character is literally only there to kill things, and actively ignores even the most basic plot points. Much like the player, he's only there for the mayhem. This may be some sort of satirical Freudian parallel on id's part, but we're too busy getting neck deep in demon guts to care. This self-aware lack of narrative may hinder the series in future, but as of right now, gibbing demons seems to be the only impetus anybody needs. Number 2. Pokémon Ruby/Sapphire, 2002. The narrative in Game Freak's handheld Pokémon titles has more or less remained the same for the past 2 decades. Capture and train Pokémon, thwart rivals, and challenge the Elite Four to become the very best there ever was. Such is the case with Generation 3's Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, taking place in the region of Hoenn. The player begins their adventure in the town of Littleroot and contests their rival May in a quest to become the greatest trainer around. Throughout their escapades, the player will come across some wannabe ne'er-do-wells associated with either Team Magma or Team Aqua, depending on the specific version of the game. Much like Team Rocket from the previous games, these guys are brewing some evil scheme which may put the world in peril. In this case, Team Magma wants to harness the powers of the legendary Pokemon Groudon so they can expand the land. Likewise, Team Aqua wants to capture Kyogre so they can increase the amount of water in the region. A terrifying ambition if there ever was one. These guys are also wanted for the crimes of jaywalking and removing mattress tags. Number 1. Destiny, 2014. Love it or hate it, Bungie's 2014 release Destiny has left its mark on the modern-day video game market. Among the first to kick off the current MMO light craze, Destiny promised to pit players alongside and against each other as they traveled the solar system in an epic quest to destroy the Vex. It was one of the most hyped-up releases of the past 10 decades, and according to many PlayStation fans, it failed to deliver, from a story perspective at least. It was too light on content, and the story really didn't make a whole lot of sense. Packed with difficult to surmise plot elements and crammed with so many characters and factions with similar names that it was a challenge to tell them apart, Bungie sincerely failed to present a cohesive narrative. The cherry atop the failure sundae was actor Peter Dinklage's infamously flat vocal delivery. The voice behind the player's ever-present ghost companion, he was so bad, or had conflicts, that the studio later had industry legend Nolan North redo all of the lines. Unfortunately, the damage was already done, and Dinklebot's asinine voice clips will forever remain a meme in the Destiny community. That wizard came from the moon. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other great video games with terrible storylines. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming content.